To see any moment now. Jon Kabat-Zinn. Welcome, Jon. It's so wonderful to see you.
Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Donna and Holly, for the invitation to be here. And of course, I'm only here virtually from the point of view of the Moscone Center and the APA meeting. But it's really an absolute delight to be able to have this kind of technology. The interesting thing is, though, when we set this up, my expectation, so much for expectations, was that you would be looking at me, but you seem to be looking at some screen on some side wall rather than, and so I'm looking at you looking away from me, which is not exactly the ideal circumstances for talking about intimacy, relationality, and so forth. That's helpful. The more you bring it underneath the screen, the more I'll feel that I'm actually seeing you as opposed to seeing a bunch of people looking at something else. In any event, I am delighted to be here, and I want to really express my gratitude to the APA in general and to Division 32 and Donna in her presidency of that for thinking to invite me here, even if it is only virtually. I actually know the Moscone Center quite well, so I feel like, in some sense, my hope for this afternoon, for the next almost 2 hours, is that we can actually drop in together in a very deep way that invites a certain kind of intimacy. And I don't mean so much you with me or me with you, but you with you. And we'll see how this unfolds. But I really feel like it was 10 years ago that I gave a talk at the APA in Boston in 2008. Almost I think it's 4 days to 10 years that I was there last. And I gave a more or less traditional PowerPoint presentation that really went through everything that had developed up to that point in terms of the science of mindfulness and its implications for both medicine and psychology and psychiatry. And let me just say from the beginning that my grounding actually in MBSR is in medicine. I'm not a psychologist myself, so I'm doubly honored to be talking to you. But it's, I think, important to recognize from the very beginning, and probably many of you know this, that mindfulness is not a therapy. And it's not a kind of one more cognitive behavioral modality or intervention that you can put in your repertoire of treatment options and then unfold it for appropriate people. In my view, what mindfulness really is it's a way of being. And it's also deeply grounded in the kind of intimacy of one's relationality with oneself, and in an investigative domain of really interrogating or inquiring deeply as to what that self is. And so this is not really a talk simply about mindfulness and psychotherapy and how it might be a valuable adjunct for your various approaches to, working with clients. It's really about psychology altogether. And I don't think there's any branch of psychology that's not humanistic, in the sense that what we're really looking at, what the psychology really means, is the study of the mind, of course. And that study is in its infancy. And I think we're on the verge of a whole new dimensionality that we might add to it, that in some circles is spoken about as first-person experience. If you tap into the Mind and Life Institute and the dialogues that Francisco Varela and colleagues started with His Holiness the Dalai Lama about the nature of mind, begin to distinguish, instead of using the words subjectivity and objectivity, we begin to distinguish between first person experience and then third person experience. And usually in psychology, if you want to investigate the mind, you take a bunch of undergraduate psychology majors and you do various kinds of studies with them in fMRI scanners and so forth. So you're investigating other people's minds by, in some sense, investigating their biology, their brains. But the first person approach is, why not start with your own mind? Why not investigate and cultivate intimacy with whoever you think you are? And then explore in a kind of intimate, systematic, and as loving as possible way the real question of whether who you think you are and the narratives you tell yourself are actually who you really are. And of course, as you know, any kind of client or patient that comes to MBSR or to your psychotherapy practice is going to come with various narratives. And some of those narratives, of course, are very, very toxic. And so one of the things that we'll be visiting today is the whole question of narratives, not just toxic narratives, but any narratives, and whether they're actually big enough and true enough to embrace the entirety of what it means to be human. And that's really, as far as I can see, what the intersection of mindfulness with mainstream psychology and mainstream psychotherapy, and for that matter, mainstream medicine, really has to offer. And as you probably know, how many of you in the room, and I can see pretty much everybody in the room, but not that in focus, but I can see you more or less. How many of you would say that you have a regular meditation practice of some kind or other, or yoga practice of some kind or another? Anybody care to just raise your hand and look around the room, because more and more hands are going up. Now hold them up high so I can really feel you in the room. If you have a regular meditation practice, now look around. If I asked that question 10 years ago, which I'm sure I did at my talk 10 years ago in Boston, there would have been 2 or 3 hands. So in a way, you're already saying something by showing up at this, because you had a lot of other options for what to come to today in this conference. And the fact that you already have some degree of first-person connection with this investigating your own mind in a way that it goes beyond the mere conceptual and the cognitive. Important and beautiful as cognition and conceptuality are, they themselves are a relatively limited form of intelligence compared to many other multiple forms of intelligence that says that we either are born with or that we can develop over time. One that we're born with, I would say, is awareness itself. And so what we're doing when we're cultivating mindfulness is we're actually cultivating awareness, but we're not getting better at awareness. What we're getting better at with practice is cultivating access to that aspect of our life experience, cultivating intimacy with that form of intelligence. And it has lots of different dimensions to it, and we'll get into this a little bit more down the road. And as Donna said, I would really like this to be interactive. We set it up so that I will be able to see you when you go to the microphone. Donna and Holly are going to be asking me some questions, and we're going to have some really interactive time. And in fact, all of it's interactive time, including the talk. And we'll also drop into some silence and the kind of guided practice. And why don't we do that right now? Let's just stop for a moment and recognize that something brought you into this room. Every single one of you had multiple choices for what to do at 10 o'clock on Friday morning at the APA annual meeting. And you chose to come here. So why don't we just take a few moments and actually allow that awareness function to embrace the body sitting on the chair in this room. And I'm sitting on a chair, in Woods Hole, Massachusetts on Cape Cod, 3,000 miles away. But in some very real way, there's no separation between us. Breathing is going on. Human beings are resting, coming to rest in wakefulness. Putting out the welcome mat for whatever arises, including my invitation to reflect a little on your intention for having come to this session. And hopefully that intention comes from some deep and mysterious place in yourself, and isn't simply a matter of because mindfulness is a hot topic nowadays, that you're just coming because of all the hype. I just lost you in terms of my feed. So if I could have that camera back, that would be really helpful. There's panel.
We're getting it so you can see everybody directly.
Okay. And so simply resting here, and you see, even as something arises that may be a little bit unexpected or untoward, or that we could have a little, say, panic reaction around or something like that, that's a choice, that we can actually hold that in awareness and realize, no, it's just happening. If I don't even see you ever again and you're still hearing me, we're still in connection. And I see you now. I'm seeing Holly and Donna, and we could turn it so that I see the people sitting in the room. Abraham is on this, and he's very good, so I like total trust in the process. And so Abraham, you're going to give me the room, right?
Yes, he's working on that, but we're sitting here with our eyes closed.
So while we're sitting here, recognizing that there are a lot of things going on in this very moment, aside from all the technological stuff, the technology, there's breathing going on, hopefully. And there's also hearing going on, essentially. There we go. And there is a sense of being in your own body. So can you bring awareness to the body as a whole, sitting here on your chair breathing, right in this moment? And realizing in some very profound way that because you made the choice to be in this room and you're already in the room, there is actually no place else to go. You've arrived in this moment. And there's nothing, I hesitate to say this at the beginning of a 2-hour workshop, but there's nothing particularly special that you're going to get. There's no place to go, there's nothing to do, and there's no particular something to attain. And the reason for that is that we're not trying to get anywhere else with mindfulness meditation or the cultivation of mindfulness, or my working definition is the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment, non-judgmentally. That this is it. Whatever your experience is, it's not only adequate, it's actually complete in this moment, as it is. And then, of course, there's a lot more going on than hearing and seeing and proprioception of the body and breathing and all of that. There's also thoughts going through the mind, plenty of them. And some degree of emotional evaluation, almost constantly. Liking, disliking, aversion, desire. And the invitation here is to just rest in awareness. Let your awareness be as big a basket for human experience as possible, and simply attend without having to have anything special happen, because all of this that's unfolding that you can be aware of, including the very fact that you can be aware of it, is actually insanely special. And is also impermanent. It is not going to be a permanent condition for any of us. We can lose hearing, we can lose eyesight, or it degrades over time with age or accident or disease. We can lose cognitive function, we can lose emotional function. I mean, so this is precious. And while we can generate, as I was referring to, narratives about how compromised we are, or how this we are, or how that we are, or how anxious we are, or how much we want something else to happen, if we are willing to actually just write ourselves a tad of a restraining order for a moment or two and simply drop into the actuality of attending to all these thoughts and emotions and sounds and sensations in the body that are arising, and find that actually peace is not something that you're going to acquire someplace else at some other time. It's already here. And sometimes that peace is called silence. Sometimes that peace is called stillness, and there's nothing extraordinary about it except everything when you're willing to show up in your full presence. And sometimes it's called awareness, or mindfulness, or heartfulness. Because, as you probably know, in all Asian languages, at least the word for mind and the word for heart are the same word. So very often, I mean, if you're not hearing the word heartfulness when you hear the word mindfulness, you're really seriously not understanding it. And this is another pointer towards some of those deep questions about the nature of the mind and the nature of psychology that I think augur a potential renaissance, so to speak, in the flowering of a 21st or 22nd century psychology that really drills deeply into the nature of what it means to be human, and why we even call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, the species from the Latin sapere, which means to taste or to know, which is what we're doing right now. We're tasting the present moment through various sense gates, including the mind. And so we're the species that, and that tasting doesn't give you like cognition. What it gives you is awareness. And so we're the species that is aware and knows that it's aware. Awareness and meta-awareness. Although I don't think we've quite evolved into that. And I would say that that is the challenge of this century for the human species, is to evolve in some way into the name we've accorded ourselves so liberally, because the potential alternatives, if we don't evolve into that dimensionality of fully embodied intelligence, I don't need to tell you the prognosis for the human species is a tad questionable, given that we have relatively Stone Age minds in with nuclear weapons. So this is not just about hospitals or the therapy room. This is basically about, in some sense, the world. And if we can find some kind of degree of understanding of what peace really is, that peace translates outwardly as well as inwardly. It's not just about a little stress reduction so I can navigate my life more effectively and more with self-efficacy and so forth, because it's very hard to be healthy in an unhealthy world or a toxic world. Now, I don't know what the prognosis is, none of us do. But I would say that it's a very good indicator that so many people have come this morning into this room and raised their hand when I asked how many of you have a practice of some kind, because that's the way this is going to happen, is by all of us taking a distributive responsibility for our piece of the reality and our belonging to the larger network of humans, and trusting in our imagination, our creativity, our capacity to actually learn from this kind of first person as well as third person investigations. And out of the learning, grow. and which is virtually inevitable. That's what learning is about, is growing and seeing in new ways. And out of that, healing. And you are all, in some sense, in the stream of healing in one way or another. And my working definition of healing, what I mean by healing, is not fixing, but it's coming to terms with things as they are. So it's not some kind of magical thinking about just sort of, oh, all you need to do is meditate and this will happen and that will happen and you'll never have a heart attack again, or your blood pressure will go down, or your T cell count will go up, or whatever it is. No, I'm talking about coming to terms with the actuality of whatever is facing you, the good, the bad, and the ugly, what Zorba, the Greek, called the full catastrophe of the human condition. And that requires a lot of spaciousness. But if you start to investigate your own awareness, which I want to emphasize you can't improve upon, you can only learn to inhabit it, because the space is already gifted to you by virtue of being born. But what we can cultivate is intimacy with it, access to it, and learn how to, in some sense, shift that to our default mode rather than the narrative mode, of the default mode network that has us driving through our moments to get to better moments at some better time, or running from all the horror that we just can't deal with anymore, and generate narratives not only about how horrible it is, but also how horrible I am. And of course, I can't begin to talk to you about that because you live in that world, and provide a kind of portal or entry way, gateway, doorway back into embodied sanity, which seems to me to be what psychotherapy and the psychotherapeutic relationship would be all about. And of course, as anybody knows who's ever gone to the doctor, we're all incredibly acute barometers of other people's attention when it comes to me. So you know right away when the doctor's not listening to you, when the doctor's no longer paying attention and thinking about something else or making a note or whatever. And there's a form of violence associated with that. That's kind of iatrogenic wounding. Because when we are as vulnerable as we are, when we go to the doctor a lot of the time, and with the diagnoses that we often come with or find out about, that kind of direct attending is very important. And don't forget, physicians around in the hospital, what are they called? They're called attendings. And so this is, again, just one more pointer towards how fundamental mindfulness really is. It would be a good idea if we cultivated the attending function, wouldn't you say? Because so much of the time, it's so easy to get caught up, especially if you're stressed and you got a million things to do and a lot of more serious cases that are, on your, schedule for the day and everything else, to actually not accord your patient your full presence in any moment. And they feel it instantly. And you've all had that experience, I'm sure, if not from the doctor or from a therapist, from somebody else. And it really is, as I was saying, a form of disregard that hurts. And so if you can be aware of it, because we're all perpetually distracted, as soon as you're aware of your distraction, you're not distracted anymore. And if you practice exercising that muscle of awareness, then it's not like there's something wrong with you and you keep on getting distracted, but the mind goes off inevitably. You bring it, when you notice what's on your mind and it's not where you're supposed to be, you bring it back. There was a wonderful article in Science in 2010 out of Harvard University, Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert. And the title of the article was, "Is a Wandering Mind an Unhappy Mind?" How many of you know that article? Not too many. Well, check it out. This is Science, okay? Like one of the two premier science journals in the world, Nature and Science, and then PNAS. So this is like, is a wandering mind an unhappy mind? And they did what's called experience sampling study of that using the iPhone, where they just pinged thousands of people and asked them at various times throughout the 24 hours. Where is your mind right now? How are you feeling right now? And is your mind on what you're supposed to be doing? And what they found, and of course you didn't need to do statistics because the sample size was so large, was that 50% of the time, no matter what you're doing, people's minds are not present for it. So this is called mind wandering. It's different from daydreaming, by the way. We won't go into that. We don't have time. But it's not like we're anti-daydreaming or, that because a lot of creativity comes from just letting the mind do itself and just lying down in a field and watching the clouds or whatever. But this kind of mind wandering is referring to you're reading, but you can't get out of that sentence. Or you're supposed to be working, but you're actually, sort of social networking on your laptop or phone or whatever. So we are, in some sense, perpetually distracted, much more now in this digital age. And there are all sorts of new diagnoses and diseases that come from this kind of perpetual distraction. And so the challenge is even greater at this particular moment in time. How can we live in this world in such a way that we actually own our moments and inhabit them? Because otherwise, sooner or later, you're going to be dead. And what you don't want to do is what Thoreau was pointing to is wake up right before you die and realize, oh my God, I got the whole thing wrong. I was just entrained into all these narratives about how they are this way and they should be that way. And we're, and all of this, and I'm not up to it, and I'm not adequate, or I'm unworthy, or whatever. And then you realize that wasn't me at all. I had every opportunity to be in another wiser relationship to it, didn't take it, dead. So my suggestion for this is die now, get it over with, and then the rest of your life is free. And what I mean to that is, and that's what the corpse pose is really inviting in yoga, and that's what dropping in or taking your seat in meditation is about, is metaphorically speaking, why not die to the future? Because most of the time, if you check where your mind is at, just like the first time you ever meditate, you realize, oh my God, my mind, I can't follow 5 breaths without being distracted. Isn't that so? 5 breaths, and I'm like, my mind is off someplace else. You're just given the assignment, just feel the breath in your belly, the rising of the inhalation in the belly, the falling right at your nostrils or whatever. You go 1, 2, 3, and you're really feeling it, and then you have some thought of like, this is stupid, and then you're off to the races. And if you start to be aware of where your mind goes when it's wandering off your chosen object of attention, well, one favorite place, as you all well know, is the future. And the most favorite pastimes are worry. That's why you're all employed. And when it's not worrying, it's planning, right? And then, or it's perseverating over the past. What happened? Who's to blame? And then endless narratives about whatever it is. And the present moment, the irony of this is the present moment, which is the only moment that we're actually alive in, that we're actually even breathing in, gets so squeezed that 10 or 20 years can go by, and then you wake up and realize, who are these children? How did I get into this whole thing, whatever it is? And the answer is mindlessness, not attending, not paying attention. It's not just doctors rounding in the hospital who need to be attending. We all need to be attending more, to be more in touch or more intimate with our moments, because cliched as it may sound, this is it. I mean, this is our life. And if we're always trying to get to some better place at some better time, the prognosis for that is just what I was describing before. Thoreau put it very beautifully when he was talking about in Walden, why he went and built that house by the lake and lived there for a couple of years, although he did go home for lunch a lot. And he said, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not when I came to die, discover that I hadn't lived. That's the real challenge of mindfulness. That's the real challenge, whether you're a therapist or whether you're a client, whether you're a physician or whether you're an astronaut. It's very easy to miss the whole thing. And so let's just take another moment and drop in right now and just rest in the aftermath of what was just said and felt and heard. And it's not so much a matter of whether you agree with it or not agree with it, but just rest in the feeling tone of this moment. And if there's tension, then fine. Just put out the welcome mat for tension or confusion or objections or whatever. A lot of it will be cognition. And it will all have various valenced affect. And how is it in the body right in this moment? And can you see that your awareness actually, without dissociation, this is not about dissociation. It's about, if you will, intimate association. Can you rest in awareness and see, even if there's some kind of anxiety or impatience or objections or whatever, that the awareness is actually completely equanimous right now and doesn't have to fall into judging or liking or disliking or wanting or whatever. That you're already whole, you're already complete. And whether I'm talking or not, you're meditating. If you're in touch with the body in this moment and in touch with what's moving through what we call the mind. That the real meditation practice is life itself. It's not sitting like a statue in the British Museum in the full lotus. But in order to actually honor how deep this kind of practice is, and it's not something that Jon Kabat-Zinn made up in 1979, although some people actually think that, but this is thousands of years old, comes out of some of the most profound wisdom traditions in the world that have also given rise to some of the most profound beauty in terms of art and poetry and so forth in the world. And now, because it's the 21st century and not the 19th century, there's no East and West. It's not like, well, they were doing this in China, but William James didn't know about it when he made that famous quote about, an education par excellence would be an education that teaches how to deal with a wandering mind, but it's easier to pose the problem than it is to find an appropriate solution. He didn't realize in 1890 that halfway around the world, thousands and thousands of monks and nuns in monasteries were doing exactly what he was describing. I have the full quote here. The faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. No one is compos sui if he or she have it not. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. But it's easier to define this ideal than to give practical instruction for bringing it about. Now, in William James Hall, they're studying mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practical instruction for bringing about exactly what he was talking about in 1890 in Principles of Psychology, the so-called father or founder of American psychology. So this is actually something, mindfulness has been around for a very long time. The reason everybody's interested in it now, I believe, is many, many reasons. One of which is now that it's kind of more available and you don't have to seek it out in Asia in monasteries, it is a form of deep nurturance. It's like an oxygen line straight into your heart. I certainly feel, and many other people feel that. Then that's one reason that we practice. Another reason is that there's now a science of mindfulness. In 2008, when I showed, when I gave my talk at APA in Boston, I showed a slide that had the number of scientific papers in the medical and scientific literature, peer-reviewed papers per year with the word mindfulness in the title. So it's a very, very stringent filter. And that curve went along, from the late 70s, early 80s at a minimal level, almost some years, no papers at all. And then it started to, increase. And it was going up, and I don't remember, maybe it was 30 or 40 papers in 2007. Now I have a slide that through last year, it's like that curve in about the year 2000. So started to go exponential. So you could see it in the slide I showed 10 years ago, but now it's going straight up. And there's about 700 papers in the last year or two. And we'll see, it's got to level off at some point because nothing goes exponential forever. Excuse me. But it's like there's a whole field associated with mindfulness with some of the most credible and highly regarded neuroscientists, psychologists, psychiatrists, physicians, researchers of all stripes engaged in this. So this is not just some kind of empty, hollow hype where everybody's totally lost their mind and they're just going crazy in some kind of craze like the tulip craze, of Holland in the 17th century or whenever it happened. There's something about this that is very, very profound and is also very ancient. And the question is, can these two streams, in a book called The Practice of the Wild, Gary Snyder actually spoke about it as being three glaciers coming together, the glacier of Descartes and Newton and modern science associated with what he called the Gaia glacier of the sort of deep wisdom of nature and the stream of, he called it Buddhist Dharma, coming together into these three glaciers where you can still see the origins of all three, but they are now moving down together. And of course, I don't have to tell you that pretty soon there won't be any glaciers. So from the time that he wrote that about 30 or 40 years ago, we've lost maybe 70 or 80% of the glaciers that we have on the planet. So that too is a subject for mindfulness. And one of the reasons why I'm saying this is not merely something for psychotherapy or for, medicine, but something that may be essential to the thriving, if not the surviving of the species. So let me just say a few more things about the narrative default mode network. And then what I'd like to do is actually engage with Donna and Holly for a bit and see how that unfolds as a proxy to actually connecting up with all of you. I've purposefully not sort of given the talk that I gave 10 years ago, updated with all the research, because for one, what it means when something is exponential is that I would have to choose extremely carefully what to present because there's so much research that's really incredibly valuable. I will say that we now understand that mindfulness can drive what's called functional connectivity in the brain. And a study just came out last week from Richie Davidson's group at the University of Wisconsin, the Center for Healthy Minds. He's one of those folks that's been doing a lot of research on not only MBSR, for which he developed the most stringent control called the Health Enhancement Program, or HEP program to control for every aspect of MBSR except the meditation practice, except the mindfulness practice. And when you do something like that, you find in all the studies that HEP looks like it's pretty much as good as MBSR when it comes to self-report. And as you probably know, you can do virtually anything with people, and the attention itself may be the most therapeutic piece of it. And so there were some, sort of studies that showed that, like, hey, there was no difference between MBSR and this control group that has nothing to do with mindfulness. So you could conclude, therefore, mindfulness doesn't add anything. It's just like a big hype or whatever. When you look at biological markers, and the first one they looked at was neurogenic inflammation, which they did with volunteers by injecting them with capsaicin, with hot chili peppers under the skin, and then measuring the fluid underneath the blister and the blister size and so forth. They found that they could differentiate very easily between the MBSR group, the meditators, and the people who just got that HEP control. Biologically speaking, something was different when you're cultivating moment-to-moment, non-judgmental, non-reactive attending, mindfulness. And then a paper, as I said, that just came out this week, showed that, in fact, amygdala reactivity in the scanner with people trained in either MBSR or HEP showed that emotional reactivity to positive images in the scanner was much higher in MBSR group than in the control group. And also that it drove neuroplastic changes, functional connectivity between the amygdala, which, as you know, is some people describe it as the threat reactivity center, but it's more than that. It's really a salience network that has to do with how much I need to attend to this to either not be eaten or to live to eat in the next day. And when they looked at that, there was functional connectivity in the meditators in the MBSR group between the amygdala and what's called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, that is part of the executive functioning group and dealing with emotion regulation, and the amygdala, and nothing in the control group. This is that HEP control that's completely the same as MBSR except for the meditation practice. Everything else is kind of equalized. So to just say that that's just ongoing, that there's so much interesting research going on. Yes, of course, some of it is problematic and some of it's going to take 100 years to sort this out. But in general, I would say that that's why there's so much interest and even so much exploitation, hype, commercializing around mindfulness, is because there's a certain foundation here that's really robust, even if most people who read it or even most journalists describing it don't really get it right or exaggerate the findings, which always happens. But from the point of view of psychology, this feels incredibly important to me. And having to do with selfhood, because one of the things that you watch when you attend in the way we did, and we'll do a little more of it, although we can't really use the verb to do when we're talking about meditation. But one of the things that we're attending to is what you could call selfing. You can't watch your own mind without realizing after a while that it's all about me. Wouldn't you say? I mean, the personal pronouns are just like going wild. My life, my anxiety, my depression, my pain, my confusion, my feeling thwarted, my anger, my this, my that, and no inquiry into who's doing the talking, even saying my body, my breath. I like to joke that, we all say I'm breathing. But frankly, if it was up to you to be breathing, you would have died a long time ago. You'd have gotten us text or a phone call or thought of something to, put out on Instagram. Whoops, dead. So frankly, you're not allowed, whoever you think you are, personal pronoun you, are not allowed anywhere near the brainstem and the phrenic nerve and the diaphragm that are keeping you breathe. You know what I'm saying? Yes, we can hold our breath for a certain period of time, but you can't commit suicide by holding your breath. So it's interesting to ask, who am I? That's in some sense the most profound meditation practice of all. Or what am I? Because if you're not the breather, if you're not the thinker, if you're not the knower, if the biology is doing itself, and if you looked at your ribosomes, you wouldn't know they were yours. Or if you looked at your liver, you wouldn't know it was yours. Or if you looked at your brain, you wouldn't know it was yours. Who the hell are you? And this seems to me to be the central question in psychology. It always has been. And we're ready to actually investigate it in ways that we haven't before. And the thing I want to point out to you is a paper that my colleagues, Norman Farb and Zindel Siegel and a bunch of their collaborators wrote in 2007. That is the title of which is Attending to the Present. Mindfulness meditation reveals distinctive modes of self-referencing. And what they studied was MBSR versus a no meditation experience control group. And they put people in scanners. And as you know, the default mode network was discovered by Reiko and colleagues. They put people in scanners and say, don't do anything, just lie there in an fMRI scanner. And when just are told not to do anything and lie in the scanner, you see a huge amount of activity in the medial frontal cortex. This whole region just goes nuts. And when you investigate what's going on there, it's mind wandering. It's exactly what that science paper was about. We just love to do it. And when we're told to do nothing, the first thing we do is think about like dinner and whether we have anything in the refrigerator or whether we need to go shopping or when I have to pick up the kids from school or whatever it is. It's just like, and then once you're in that mode, Mark Williams and John Teasdale call it doing mode, when they're talking about depressive rumination. When you're in that thought stream, the present moment just dissolves. Awareness just dissolves and we go on autopilot. And we're very good at it. And then this medial region, just the default mode network, or what we call the narrative network, they're overlapping. When you take people with MBSR, which is what this study did, and do the same thing with them, you find that there's that region of the brain, that activity reduces, and another region of the brain, a lateral region that includes the insula and various other structures laterally in the cortex, that lights up more. And when you investigate, and they do this in a very sophisticated way with adjectives and so forth, what's going on in those people's experience after 8 weeks of MBSR training, they find is we said, no, there's no narrative. In fact, they call it the experiential network because it's just like this moment, this breath, feelings, emotions, thoughts, but you're resting in awareness or more what they call decentered from it all, not identifying so much as my pain, my anxiety, my depression, or my future or my story. And so it's just that. And these two modes, which usually are tightly coupled, are not coupled at all. They're uncoupled. And so I urge you to actually read and study this paper because I think it's a model for what might be possible in the future for psychology to actually take that glacier of universal Dharma wisdom, not Buddhist wisdom, but what the Buddhists discovered by utilizing the laboratory of sitting still and being silent and investigating the nature of mind that way from a first-person perspective with the way we do it in the labs and so forth. Have those things come together has the potential to bring about, I would say, a renaissance in our understanding of the nature of mind, what we mean by mind, the nature of sentience, and how you get sentience out of matter and out of 100 trillion synaptic connections and 100 billion neurons. I mean, you've got the most complex organization of matter in the known universe right inside, right under your own little old cranium. And a lot of times, so, you think, and we get depressed, we get anxious, and we forget how miraculous, in a certain way, we are. And we're embodied too, or we can be embodied. And we can be integrated and whole. And whole is the root meaning of the word healthy and healing. And so all of these different streams can come together in the science, in the psychotherapy, in the medical treatment to actually begin to reinvent or discover, perhaps for the first time, what it means to be truly human. I think that's what the bringing together of these different glaciers or these different streams or these different epistemologies or ways of knowing really augurs in terms of promise. And to tell you the truth, I think that's why so many people came into the room today. That on some deep level, if you were to investigate why you really, really, really came to this, especially since so many of you raised your hands about the meditation practice, without reifying it or, sort of putting it into some kind of straitjacket or box, this is like a profound open question regarding who we are, not just as individuals, but as families, as a nation, as a species. And we need all the help we can get. So if there's a particular kind of first-person, disciplined, meditative perspective to do this, this is not airy-fairy, crystal-gazing, spiritual, sort of voodoo. This is, and that's why world-class athletes want to train in mindfulness. You probably know that the Golden State Warriors, for instance, mindfulness is one of their, key, sort of elements of that is part of their values, and they train in it. Why? Because the coach, Steve Kerr, picked it up when he was on the Chicago Bulls because my colleague George Mumford was training the Chicago Bulls in mindfulness in the Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen era, and then went with the coach, to the Lakers and trained, Shaquille O'Neal and all those folks in mindfulness as well. They're billionaires. They don't need to do meditation. They know how to shoot baskets. They're looking for some edge, and whether it's the one basketball team or another or a baseball team, or what they're looking for is to sort of some kind of edge to define performance more effectively. And they know that you have to be infinite, just as Olympic athletes. You have to actually tune to the mind, because it's the mind more than the body that's actually going to defeat you most of the time in any kind of competition, your attitude. So if you exercise the muscle again, makes a big difference. So let me just reflect for a moment before we go any further. Let's drop back into silence. And I'm going to just see if at this moment in time there's anything else I want to impart. No, I think the only thing I'll say is that if you go back to Carl Jung in the when he was writing, he got very interested in Japanese Zen through D.T. Suzuki, and he wrote a book. He wrote an introduction to D.T. Suzuki's book called Introduction to Zen Buddhism, in which he said, and I'm quoting, that the methods and philosophical doctrines that have been developed in Zen Buddhism simply put all Western attempts along these lines into the shade. And he was talking about psychotherapy. So it's just to say, if you start looking around, the same thing with Freud talking about even hovering attention. This is not, again, about East or West or, sort of Buddhism or secularism or anything like that. This is about being human. And that's why I said what I said about all of the divisions of the APA really being about the same one thing, and that is being human. A lot of different doors into it, interrogating or investigating that. So why don't we just drop back into silence, see if you can establish yourself in a posture that embodies wakefulness and dignity, whatever that means to you. I've said an awful lot, although, of course, I could say an awful lot more, but I'm not going to at this point. But instead, let's actually drop back into the body, into the breath moving in the body, and into silence, silent wakefulness. And simply move from that doing mode into what I call being mode. Where there is, and I'm quoting the Heart Sutra, the one pristine Zen teaching, where there truly is no place to go, nothing to do, and nothing to attain in this moment. Because everything that you need to attain, you already have. And what ignorance is ignoring that. So just this breath coming in, just this breath leaving the body. Moment by moment as we sit here. Resting in the awareness of it. So you're not doing the breathing. You're experiencing the breath sensations in the body. And you're resting in awareness. And although you're featuring the breath sensations in the body center stage in the field of your awareness, thoughts, emotions, sounds, my voice, silence, everything is also present in the room and in the wings. And we're cultivating what you might call a choiceless awareness, where we just kind of can be anchored in one object of attention like the breath, but the awareness actually is boundless. Your own awareness is boundless. That has no center, no periphery, and is much, much bigger than any thought. And so we're befriending silence. We're befriending stillness. We're befriending open-hearted spaciousness right here, right now. And if Thoreau was right, as if your very life depended on it. And of course it does, in more ways than you think, and in more ways than any of us can possibly think, because no matter how great thinking is, it's got its limits. When it collaborates with mindfulness or awareness, the whole is far greater than the sum of the parts. Can you simply be the knowing that your awareness already is? Underneath thinking, can you simply be equally the not knowing and the knowing that you don't know? right here in this moment. And can you attend through all your sense gates and welcome into awareness experience right in this moment? And hold it all, the pleasant, the unpleasant, and the hardly noticed because it's neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And if there are various narratives running in your head, no problem. Because your awareness of the narrative is not caught up in the narrative. And again, underscore, that's not dissociation, that's wisdom. To recognize that you, whoever you think you are not your thoughts, not your emotions. And that you're simply bigger than them and bigger than all the narratives that show up in the fMRI scanner or when you're not in the fMRI scanner. Most of them aren't true anyway, and they certainly aren't true enough. And they are a kind of straitjacket because they prevent us from that trajectory of learning, growing, healing. And then the fourth one, which I didn't mention, transformation, by which I mean realizing of who you actually are, which may be beyond words altogether, but can be expressed and embodied in how you be and how you are in relationship with inner experience and outer experience. Because in the end, mindfulness is all about relationality and those natty personal pronouns. So essential and yet so seductive. And awareness really is orthogonal to all of that and invites a kind of a new degree of freedom. It's a new dimension, which we can learn and train ourselves to inhabit. It actually brings with it both wisdom and a greater sense of compassion, openness of heart. And as I said, this dropping in on the present moment is something that, independent of location, independent of place, independent of circumstances, the proverbial stuff can be hitting the proverbial fan. What better time to actually drop in on the full dimensionality of your experience and hold it all in awareness rather than reacting out of some kind of emotional kind of some kind of limited emotional scenario that you've sort of fallen into the habit of bringing to the fore whenever you feel threatened. And so in that vein, as I was suggesting from the very beginning, this whole time together is the meditation practice, not merely when we're sitting in silence. I'm not going to stretch out the silence, but we could easily sit for the rest of the hour in total silence. And that would probably be more profound than anything else that's going to happen. But I'm not going to do that to you. Because we have other opportunities here for deep connection, and I want to really honor them in the approximately 40 minutes that we have left. And so first I'd like to turn and maybe even have Donna turn the laptop so that I can see her again and see Holly, and we can engage in conversation, in dialogue, in inquiry. And I would encourage you to ask the questions that you most are tempted to ask, and don't edit yourself if they're let them be challenging, because if this work isn't up to those kinds of challenges, really there's no point in us engaging in it in the first place. But I want to just say before we go to that, I want to thank you already for your attention. I know some of you will be coming and going, maybe mostly going, but I want to just thank you for your attention. And I hope that, especially if you go between now and the end of this, I want to express the hope that something may have touched you, and to say that if even one word or one moment in this presentation touched you, trust it. Not me, trust it, and nurture it, and let it merge with whatever brought you into the room in the first place, and see what unfolds in the next 20 or 30 years. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So I'm going to start out by asking you a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, we were talking earlier about the nature of mind, and I started out my career as in journalism. I covered Capitol Hill and
Right.
the White House for CNN in the early days when it first started, 1980. So don't do the math, please. But so I was very anxious and I couldn't sit still. I was rushing from one event to another. And I realized that I couldn't even sit still for like a moment. And it was very scary for me. So I met a couple in town and I found out that they were meditators. And one day I saw them at the diner and I rushed over and I said, excuse me, I understand you guys are meditators. Can you teach me? I think I probably scared the heck out of them. But anyway, they did. They invited me over to their house and I got meditation instruction and I began. And within about 2 seconds, I thought my head was going to explode because I couldn't do it. I couldn't sit there. And it was very heartbreaking to me. And I was coming out of my skin. That's what it felt like. I was coming out of my skin. And I realized at that point that I really did need to learn how to sit and do a concerted meditation practice to be able to incorporate that into my life. So then flash ahead several years and I went back to school and became a clinical psychologist. I was working on my degree. And I said to myself, if I can't sit with myself, how can I sit with another? And that really struck me. And yesterday I did a presentation on self-love, this idea of how it's so important to really embrace the self, to have affiliation with the self, to be a best friend to the self. And I'm wondering, and I want to ask you, compassion, the word means to sit with, to suffer with another. So is mindfulness an antidote to this not enoughness that we feel in this country, this illness of not enoughness? And how can we sit with another if we can't sit with ourselves?
Wow. Well, a deep bow to you for sharing part of your story and for articulating things in that way. The obvious answer is you can't be present for another if you can't be present for yourself. And we see a lot of people who try, who are like everything is about others and helping and everything else, And it's like, it's exhausting, it's extremely stressful. And then usually we want something back from it. This is the difference between, say, empathy and compassion, is that, you empathize and there's a certain kind of expectation that it will be reciprocated or at least appreciated. Compassion is like, it's like impersonal. You're recognizing the suffering of another. You don't need anything because you've, in some sense, transcended that self that would need something from it, or to think of yourself as a better person because now you can also put compassion into your narrative. Yeah, I'm also a very compassionate person, aside from being mindful and embodied. So I think that the real challenge here is to recognize that when I'm talking about meditation, I'm actually talking about a love affair. It took me 40 years, I think, to realize that. But when I take my seat in the morning to practice, after a while, I realized this is actually a love affair with life. It's a love affair without attachment. It's a love affair without uh, 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 needing to have an outcome. The love is already present. And when you drop in to wakefulness, it's not like you have to fabricate love or generate love or anything like that. But it's just like, hey, your eyes work, your ears work, your nose works, everything works, your digestive system works. What is your problem? But there's so much suffering in the world, including in ourselves. We still have lots of suffering. How do we put the welcome mat out for the suffering? And then realize that you are not your pain, you are not your suffering, and you are not your narratives about it. And it turns out that there's a kind of geometry to this. And when you realize that almost all the pain is from resisting things being as they are, then, of course, the pain dissolves. And then you could say what it's replaced with is clear seeing. And if you practice long enough, maybe even wisdom, the wisdom of not taking yourself or things that happen personally, and then being able to act to alleviate suffering in the world, including your own, and to do it without exhausting yourself or burning out. All these compassionate people, very often they like burn out after a while. That's not compassion. There's no compassion fatigue. It's misdefinition. There's empathy fatigue. How many more people can I empathize and not get, any kind of something back from it? It's exhausting. But compassion is like, because you're not taking it personally, you're not taking them personally, and it's an action. It's not just you act in a certain kind of direction, even if that act is non-doing, not doing anything. But sometimes it's actually, doing what needs to be done, whether it's giving money to somebody on the street, which is like the easiest thing to do, or even easier not to do, but to actually make eye contact with that person, much harder. To actually realize that's a human being. That's not somebody I can write off and go into the subway. And when I write that person off or turn away, who's going to suffer? I'm going to suffer in a certain way. I'm hardening myself to the human suffering. On the other hand, if it's just empathy based, yeah, you're going to burn out and you don't have enough money to just give away to panhandlers and stuff like that. And that may not be the best solution anyway. That's why I'm not saying there's one answer to the practice of mindfulness, and that, like, this is what you will get from practicing mindfulness, and is how it will help heal not only yourself and your clients in the world. It's like we don't know. The not knowing, as I said at some point in the guided meditation, that's more important than the knowing that we don't know, and yet trusting that if each one of us becomes, as we are, the center of the universe, because we think we're the only center of the universe. But if we recognize everybody's the center of the universe, that's its own decentering. And then you don't take things quite so personally. That's wisdom. And when it's embodied through practice, through grounding mindfulness in the body, your whole life is totally different. It's like kumbaya and we just sort of play the violin and everything is one. No, there's a lot of horror, an enormous amount of dukkha, of suffering, of out of jointness in the world. And we don't have to go into, the politics of it all in this country. But since you were with CNN, I mean, you know that the country is going to pieces in a certain way. It's almost as if it's at war with itself. And if a body, if the heart cells and the liver, if the heart cells decided that those liver cells, they don't look the right way, they're not the right color, they are like weird shape, and they don't have any actin and myosin, what the hell's the matter with them? We're much more superior to them. We're not going to give them any blood. How long do you think the heart and the rest of the body is going to survive? No. So we need to, in some sense, understand what the diversity of the human biology is, and the fact that even among the tallest black Bantu or newer warrior or person in Africa, and the shortest white jockey running sort of the Kentucky Derby, or running's not the right verb because it's the horse that does the running. But their DNA is the same to the 99.9% level. So we need to actually bring mindfulness, as I'm saying, to the body politic as much as we need to bring it to the body itself.
And as you were saying, it's really this notion of loving the self. It's not pie in the sky. It's not snowflakey. It's serious business, and it matters. So in order to sit in the room with someone else, would you say that we need to develop a sense of true love and compassion for ourselves? And our physiology would change, wouldn't you say, when we can embrace ourselves and feel a sense of love? It's healthy.
No question about it. I mean, if you just look at Alyssa Eppel's work with Liz Blackburn, who won the Nobel Prize, just looking at telomere length as a function of stress. The telomeres are those repeat subunits of DNA at the ends of all of our chromosomes that degrade every time a cell divides. And they're a biological measure of aging, and their degradation accelerates with stress, with life stress. And so, I would check out their work. I think they wrote a book together called The Telomere Effect. But absolutely, that our biology changes, but also our ability to work with other people will change, because it doesn't all have to be my way, because we've looked and seen that I don't even know what my true way would be. I don't even know who I am. That not knowing, for instance, is not like pathology. That's actually a form of wisdom to know. I mean, Socrates always went around saying, know thyself, or at least that's the way they talk about it. And one of his students is said to have asked him at some point, Phil, Socrates, you go around saying, know thyself, but do you know yourself? And Socrates said, no, because it's always good to confuse the students, and, make them think for themselves. But he wasn't finished. He said, no, but I understand something about this not knowing.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Holly,
So
but just to say, oh, so sorry, but just to say that it might be a good idea maybe to walk into a room with a client and both of you can not know together and then discover together.
Well, exactly. And there are a lot of books about psychotherapy and mindfulness. I mean, there's some really great ones called Sitting Together, out of Harvard Medical School. And there's, Chris Germer's Ron Siegel and Paul Fulton's book, Mindfulness and Psychotherapy, which is an edited volume. There are all sorts of resources, Ruth Baer, and then William Kukin from Oxford Mindfulness Center and Christina Feldman are coming out with a book in 2019 on mindfulness and, its implications for social therapy and emotion regulation and so forth. So there's never been a more opportune moment to have real supports for bringing it into the therapeutic relationship. But the most important thing is, and your clients, as I was suggesting in my talk, will know this, when you're present, your presence is doing all the work. It's doing the listening, and they feel it. They feel met. And if you're just sort of running techniques on them or anything else, of course, none of you in this room would do that. But if there's any way in which you're falling into autopilot around them, they'll know that too. And that's so I think that this is, in some sense, a way of simply tuning the instrument before we actually, play the concert. But none of mindfulness is rehearsing for the concert. every moment is the concert. So we're tuning all the time. And when we talk about it, mindfulness in education and teaching in public schools and so forth, most kids are coming to school nowadays and they're not ready to learn. I mean, they need to be trained in how to attend so that they can actually pay attention without the teachers yelling at them to pay attention, and then love the curriculum. So the teachers need to learn to light up the curriculum so that it's lovable. And the students, and I've seen, some of the worst school systems in the country, the most problematic, the kids just dropping into silence in the most amazing ways, even if half of them have ADD or are on the spectrum of one kind or another. They love to practice silence, as long as it's wakefulness and not doing.
Well, Jon, what you're saying about mindful presence really brings me to a question I've been dying to ask for years. So I'm going to jump in. And what Donna was saying about love, when I think of the word love, the closest word associated with it for me is relationship.
Yeah.
And we were sitting just now, I think you said mindfulness is all about relationality.
Yes, I did.
Or something to that effect.
I said exactly that.
Wonderful.
You were listening very carefully.
And it comes back to this point that you were making earlier about evidence-based manualized psychotherapies. They emphasize standardized therapeutic techniques, protocol procedures, sometimes over the therapeutic relationship, I've found, and the patient's relationship to their own direct experience. And so my question for you is, how might a therapist's own mindfulness practice, their own participation in MBSR, if they learn mindfulness that way, how might this help the therapist then bring awareness to this relationality when they're doing those types of therapies?
Well, thanks very much for that question. I think you articulated in such a way that you may have answered the question,
Uh,
because it's not a question of how, it's merely a question of remembering.
yeah.
I mean, do you know that your mind is wandering, or don't you? And the mind wandering could be thinking about the patient rather than listening to the patient. And even imagining what the patient is going to say next, as opposed to just listen, for God's sake, and get out of your own way. Mark Epstein, who's a psychiatrist who writes about this from a kind of more traditional Buddhist perspective, wrote this wonderful book, Thoughts Without a Thinker, and many more following up, including a recent one on trauma and another one on just getting over yourself. This is absolutely critical, but it's not rocket science. It's not like you even have to train in MBSR or, go to some Buddhist monastery to sit a retreat, although both of those things would be a good idea. But to just be aware that your mind is wandering brings it back already, and that your narratives actually prevent deep attending, deep listening. And so, in a sense, you're short-circuiting your own intelligence, because you don't know what the most therapeutic response would be to whatever your client is saying. But if you're at 80% because you're partially distracted, that's not as optimal as if you're really right there and you'll let your response formulate itself rather than merely coming out of cognition. No matter how smart you are, no matter how great your techniques are. And so it's actually a no-brainer. Now, in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy for depression, how many of you are aware of mindfulness, MBCT, and have read the Green Book? Anybody raise your hands? Because that is a manualized, treatment manual for research purposes and dissemination. I always refuse to do that for MBSR. The treatment manual for MBSR is full catastrophe living. And if you don't understand it, you shouldn't be teaching it, because it leaves a lot. It doesn't tell you how to do it, because you have to. That comes out of your practice. It comes out of your first-person experience. But for all sorts of reasons, they had to call it mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, because guess what? All three of them are cognitive therapists. Okay, so, but it was a very interesting learning curve that they wrote about themselves with tremendous candor in their forward to the book about how important it was to get out of their own conceptual modalities in order to be there, be present for the patient. Otherwise, they would do stuff to the patient that operationalized whatever their models and algorithms were, rather than listening and then letting the patient find his or her own path through. And that's a kind of form of realization. You wake up and you realize, my God, I'm actually running a program down on people, calling it a therapy, as opposed to inviting them to participate. So it's not either or. It's like the therapist's presence is, of course, I think everybody agrees in some sense, the critical element of the therapeutic relationship, because it's underscore relationship. It's not about just do the right thing and everything will get better. If I tell me if I'm not making sense, but I mean that's the way I see it.
No,
But again, I'm not a
absolutely.
psychotherapist.
Absolutely. And John, that sort of brings me to a follow-up question that I had, maybe along more practical lines. You mentioned, of course, the importance of mindfulness practice, why it's imperative for therapists to have their own established practice um, in terms of being present with their uh, patients, with their clients. But oftentimes I've heard people ask, well, how much practice experience are we talking about? Especially if the therapist is then moved to try to share their experience with mindfulness and mindfulness practices with their clients or their patients. How much experience is needed, and how can therapists discern when they're ready um, to bring it into the therapy room, perhaps more clearly with the client?
And before you answer, John, whoever would like to ask questions next, please line up at the microphone in the middle of the room. Thank you. Go ahead, John.
Well, it's not just that. There's also the ethical question that I know people were raising back in the early 80s, therapists. Like, is it actually ethical for me to teach meditation to my clients if I'm into it? Because in a way, you may be attached to doing that and laying something on your client that they have no interest in whatsoever. Things have evolved so much since then, and I think so many psychotherapists are into meditation that were not in the early 80s. That the real challenge is to just ask yourself that question and see what comes up in terms of dosing, for instance. How much practice do I need in order to be mindfulness? Well, more than any of us are going to be able to do in our lifetime. That's what I would say. And so we're all, in some sense, playing catch up and doing the best we can. And it's very important not to idealize anybody, even the Dalai Lama, and put them on a pedestal and say, oh, yeah, that's the gold standard. And I'm just a schlep of a meditator. That's a technical Buddhist term, by the way. And inadequate, and I don't meditate enough. Don't forget, I said life itself is the meditation practice. So in a certain way, you have as many opportunities as the Dalai Lama or anybody else to be present. And if you anchor that in formal meditation practice or formal mindful yoga practice, you can do it lying in bed for all I care. In fact, that's a fabulous way to do it, except for the occupational hazard of falling asleep instead of falling awake. But with practice, you can actually learn how to fall awake, train yourself to fall awake. And then how much you bring it into the therapy, I guess, would be an inquiry and an investigation rather than selling your clients on something. But if you are grounded in meditation, after a while, people will start coming to you for therapy because you're grounded in meditation, and it will change your mix of clients and so forth. And then there's the potential that you give people homework in their meditation practice, and then they meditate in between sessions, you meditate in between sessions, and see what happens to those sessions in terms of the kind of degree of high resolution focus that might happen because you've given them some kind of explicit but gracious and expansive framework of homework, if you will, of meditation practice. To just attend, and it doesn't have to be sitting and watching your breath in the full lotus position. It could be what's your mind like when you put your kids to bed and they don't want to go to bed? Can you be aware of that? Or anything else when you feel anxious about like being pulled between family stuff and work stuff, or anything else. So that's the practice, and I think it unfolds just the way the therapy unfolds. You can't script it. And when you do script it, as I was suggesting, everybody knows you're running down something on them. You're putting them through some kind of technique that you believe in, and they just can recognize it's an authenticity right from the start. So in terms of the ethics of it, the foundation of all mindfulness practice is ethics, and it's really the Hippocratic Oath: first, do no harm. And how would you even know if you're doing harm? I mean, just a glance can do harm, or turning away, or not listening. How would you even know if you're doing harm unless you're really, really, really paying attention? And since that's something we're born with, that capacity, and again, the awareness is already yours. It's not like you have to acquire it. It's only we have to learn how to inhabit it more. Well, that's the love affair. And if it sounds like this is all just a bunch of BS, then give it up. Don't do it. Do something else. Next time I talk at APA, go to some other session.
So we have a line of beautiful, wonderful people. So if you could say your name and tell John what it is and your
Certainly.
question.
My name is Shayna Foxley. Can you hear me? Is the sound okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. My name is
Terrific.
Good. We have one of these things where when you're seeing me, I'm not seeing you, but it's okay.
Oh, okay.
No, that's fine.
I'm listening.
I'll look towards you and then.
I'm here even though I'm not there.
Right. It's my pleasure to make your virtual acquaintance. My name is Shayna Foxley. I'm a critical historian of psychology at York University. And just to frame my question for you, so you know where I'm coming from, I was raised in Goenka, Vipassana. My alma mater is Naropa. I've been a research fellow at Mind and Life's Summer Institute. I'm coming from that frame.
Got it.
So what I'd like to ask you to speak to further is my research looks at epistemologies of mindfulness theory in psychology's different discourse communities. I look at Varela, Langer, Richard Davidson, Linehan, the range.
John Donne.
Yeah, Dunn, precisely. Harrington, the crew. Could you speak to what happens in mindfulness theory's epistemologies when it changes different settings? Like the broad one, of course, is when it comes from religious context to our expansionist capitalist context, or when it goes from the research setting to the clinical practice thing. From your purview, after all these decades, do you see slippage or changes? How can the research inform the way that psychology is applying and disseminating mindfulness to?
Oh, that's a fabulous question. I'm not sure that I can really give an adequate answer.
Sure.
I think in part of it I did answer before, and that is that I don't know.
Right.
But I trust that, I'm discovering that you exist and that you care about those interesting
Very much.
epistemologies. Just the very fact that you can frame it that way and that you can ask that question about how it goes from a kind of traditional, say, religious framework to sort of capitalist society where it's like out there and and has the potential to be infinitely corrupted and commercialized and commodified. Yeah, I miss
Also
you.
to do a lot of good if we're conscientious of that.
Well, exactly. That's why I do what I do. But I think that what I would say is just to applaud what you're doing, and whenever you write something, I'd like to read it because it will expand my own understanding of what's possible in the future. And I don't know what's possible in the future, but the way we create the future is taking care of the present.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
You too.
Hello, my name is Mahip. I'm an
I'm
international student from I'm an international student at Tennessee State University in Nashville.
wonderful. Wonderful.
And, I don't have a question as such. My purpose today is to reach out. Became interested in mindfulness like last year or 2 years ago, and I have been regularly practicing. And the
If
more
you
I
hold the
grow,
mic right up to your mouth, we'll be able to
Okay.
hear it.
More like an ice cream cone.
Right here.
okay, is it
There you
all right
go.
now? Okay. So I developed an interest into mindfulness in the last 1 or 2 years, and I've been regularly practicing. And the more I grow in my practice, the more I realize that the sense of self that I used to carry is not true anymore. The more I grow, I feel that this sense of self is water-like, as if it changes all the time.
Mm.
So the identifiers that I carry, for example, I am from India. I was a lawyer. I'm a guy. I am a PhD student. These are the identifiers I carry, but I do not actually carry them. That's how I identify myself. But this is my narrative sense of self. Like the 2007 article you mentioned, I've read it. It's in neuroscience. But I am in counseling psychology. So I can understand those concepts. I can experience those concepts. But all I need is some guidance because I'm in the counseling psychology program and no other professor works in mindfulness. I wanted to really meet you. I got super excited when I saw your name, and I kind of got disappointed when I saw you on the screen. So, so I wanted to do research into this.
What's disappointed you?
Because when I meet someone in person, I can get a sense of their vibes. I know what it is. I can feel that intimacy. And
Yeah.
I don't feel it so much on the screen.
Okay, that's fair enough. You know, you're in Nashville.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where Vanderbilt is too?
Yes, the OSHA Center is also there.
Go visit Dave Vago.
Yes, I emailed him. He never replied.
You know him? What's that?
I emailed him, I think 3-4 months ago, but he did not reply.
Go. Okay, email him again and put my name in the subject line.
Awesome.
and go visit him and just have a conversation with him because they're doing very, very interesting things over there that might be in deep alignment with what it is that you're talking about and caring about.
Yes. Okay.
And he's in the same city. So.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Evgenia Yorganda. I'm a psychotherapist practicing in Greece. I wanted to have a comment and a question. One comment is about Socrates. You referred to Socrates.
Yes, I did.
And, I just wanted to make the observation that Socrates was sentenced to death by the Athenian society, which is considered the cradle of democracy.
Yeah.
He was raising awareness.
Yeah.
People. He was corrupting the young people because of his habit of raising awareness. So yeah, I believe very much in what you said about know thyself and not knowing and about being aware. But there is also a very high cost sometimes.
That's very true. That's very true.
And my question has to do with how you explain or understand the fact that although, as you said, there are so many more people practicing mindfulness and meditation nowadays, there are so many more people at the same time voting for people who are leaders in different countries that are so hateful.
Yeah, well, this is a form of suffering. It's a form of delusion. It's a form of ignorance. And that happens. Totalitarianism happens, fascism happens, all of that kind of stuff happens when we fall into fear and then we fall into othering, and then we fall into racism, and then we fall into justifying injustice. And that can be held in awareness. And rather than going into one more dualistic us against them, so that now the mindful people are going to go to war with the unmindful, people who we don't like and who are, taking over the world and threatening. And, all you need to do is watch the newspaper in the United States. And I know Greece has been going through it in spades for a very long time. This is part of that evolution of humanity that I'm talking about. This is not about Greece. It's not about the United States. It's not about Trump. It's not about, Hungary and the president of Hungary, who used to be a liberal. It's about when we get seduced by power, we also can exploit people and their fears. Goering said it beautifully that, any society can easily, go fascist. All you need to do, and this was his prescription, is tell people that there's a certain kind of enemy that's responsible for their problems, and then create some kind of incident, and then you have it, war. And what we need to avoid this time is going to war, because ultimately we're going to war with ourselves. It's the human species. That's why I said what I said about the heart versus the liver. That we need to recognize the humanity in the people we don't like. And we need to find a way that actually they'll recognize our humanity too, because they don't even know who we are. They don't like us because of the narratives that they believe in. And those narratives are partly self-generated, and they're partly generated by economic hardship and a sense of the other going to be changing their life circumstances that they've been happy with for the past 3,000 years or 200 years or whatever. Whether it's in Bavaria or whether it's in Greece or whether it's wherever it is, immigration or Sweden for that matter. I mean, the world is facing these incredible problems that are very often driven by capitalism and also by a kind of misdiagnosis of the political landscape that led to the United States being the generative factor in ISIS, for instance. ISIS was formed in the prisons of Iraq that we were controlling. So that's a short answer to your very deep question, but I hope that it's a hopeful one in the sense that the challenge is to do a non-dual mindful politics as opposed to one more using against theming. We know where that goes, and it doesn't go very far. On the other hand, we can't be naive about it. So we need to develop a mindful economics and a mindful politics.
Well, thank you. I really do hope that we do evolve upwards and not downwards. And
Well, that's up to all of us, so to speak. And I really do think we have the capacity to do it if we do it as a love affair.
thank you.
All right, we're going to take one more question, and it is past time, but we'll stay. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Z Xu. I'm a clinical psychology student from William James College in Massachusetts. And my question is kind of related to the last one. Like I was learning about mindfulness and Buddhist teachings. It's all about accepting the suffering, understanding we're all human beings and those kind of things. And at the same time, it feels like
wait a minute. I just want to stop you right there. It's not about accepting suffering. It's about recognizing the nature of suffering.
Yeah, recognizing the suffering. And at the same time, I'm seeing many psychologists participating in social justice movements.
Yes.
And it feels like sometimes when I'm recognizing, being more not taking things too personally, I feel like I'm playing a more passive role in this movements. I don't know if you want to kind of speak more about it.
Yes. Yeah. And what I want to say is maybe not what you're going to expect, but your awareness of the tendency to go passive, that awareness isn't at all passive. So it's really a form of intelligence that I would suggest might lead you to another kind of activism, an embodied activism that's non-dual. Now, I don't know exactly how to do that myself, so I'm not going to tell you how to do it or anybody else. But I would venture to at least suggest that we consider it and that we actually realize how deeply we can be engaged when we don't take things personally, but that doesn't mean we just sit on the couch and watch TV and don't care. When injustice is raining down in so many different ways in society. If we are all part of cells, if you will, of the body politic, then as individual cells, we need to take responsibility for the whole. And I don't think that's a particular kind of liberal or conservative position. I would say that what that is actually a commonsensical position.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming today with your heart and your mind open. And thank you, Jon Kabat-Zinn. We love you.
Oh, you're very sweet. Nice to be with all of you, and have a wonderful rest of the conference.
Thank you. Thank you. Enjoy your next session, everyone. Thank you, guys.